We need to come down from like just being like go, 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 go. And especially in today's world where we're like hyper aware and hyper on, like being able to step back is a huge thing.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, who wants you to help her win a podcast award someday, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends. Welcome to episode 98 of Running for Real. I am really excited that you are here today for this. Well, I think we could call it a bonus episode. It's not typically coming to you on a bonus episode day on the first Monday of each month, but it is a bonus episode in that I didn't expect to get it. It was recorded in person and I didn't schedule this really other than like a few hours before. But I thought it would be a fantastic opportunity for me to talk to this guest and, rather than having my meticulously planned Skype interview, which I set up weeks in advance, I was at a conference with my husband, Steve, and I saw this guy waiting for a drink in line one day at dinner time, and I took my chance. I went straight over there. I persuaded him to record an episode with me, and the next day we did it. So I am so excited today to tell you that I have Steve Magness on the podcast. Steve is the coach behind many of the best American athletes out there right now. And although he's really humble and modest, he's also very in demand because he knows what he's been doing. And he's taken the best in America to become some of the best in the world. It's been impressive to watch, and I'm really excited about seeing what he has got coming for us in the future with these athletes he's working with. But for those of you who don't know him, there's also more to Steve's story. He was also the whistleblower on the Nike Oregon project. And he was the person who was essentially the guinea pig to some maybe unethical decisions years ago. And he's the main reason that there's actually an ongoing investigation. Now, as that investigation is ongoing, Steve is very limited to what he can actually say. But I strongly recommend you go research this topic to kind of decide for yourself what you think is going on. My husband Steve, has told me about what he had seen of Steve Magness this week and how he seemed like just this really genuine, morally straight compass, will stand up for what he believes in kind of guy, not someone who would have a reason to lie. But you can decide for yourself. I hope you enjoy this episode, and I hope someday we can have Steve back on the show to discuss this in more detail. But I think you'll enjoy the other parts of this interview too. There's a lot of good information here, and as I said, he is one of the best coaches out there right now, so take some notes from this episode. This guy is an absolute genius. One more thing before we get to this episode. Did you know that my book on overcoming amenorrhea is out in just 2 days? Well, I guess technically 3. On the 21st of January, my book will be out. It is available for pre-order on Amazon right now, but you can get it in hardback. Paperback. You can order yourself a copy on the 21st and get it delivered to you if you want a physical copy, or you can go pre-order and get a digital copy on Amazon right now. So depending on what country you're in, you just go to Amazon, search for my name, Tina Muir, Tinamuir, or you can just type in the book Overcoming Amenorrhea, but I know that word is a little bit complex, so you're probably safest just to go search for my name. If you've been enjoying these episodes, please go get yourself or your family member or someone who is, working through amenorrhea, maybe has had some trouble with this in the past, get them a copy. It has my story and everything that I know about how to get your period back, how to be healthy with your eating and nutrition, and how to find your belief in who you are. Yes, who you are, not what you are. My friend Rennie McGregor, who is the author of the book Orthorexia, told me it was a brilliant and easy read, which is so good to hear. I hope you think so too, and you can go to tinamuir.com/pre-order. That's all one word, pre-order. Or you can find Overcoming Amenorrhea on Amazon. Thank you so much, my friends. I really appreciate your support of me. Let's go meet Steve. Steve, I am really excited to have you here in person. I haven't had many interviews that have been in person, and I know my listeners are going to be really excited to hear from you. I've been trying to nail you down for an interview for years now, and you've somehow managed to dodge me, but I caught you at this coaches convention, and I'm excited to learn from you, and I know my listeners will be too. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thanks a lot. I'm glad to be here.
I don't know if you really mean that. We'll see if you actually want to be here. He might just be saying that because I pinned him down. All right, so let's talk about, first off, you kind of have two jobs. Well, I guess if you want to call yourself an author, that's three. So, but let's talk mostly, you are head cross-country coach at University of Houston, and you also are a very well-known elite level coach. Having athletes like my good friend Sarah Crouch, you got Sarah Hall, Neely Gracie, Mark English, among many others. So firstly, my question is, why do both? I mean, surely at this point you could kind of do one or the other, but what is it about have both together that you quite enjoy right now?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I don't know. I've always kind of followed a life philosophy that is like follow my interests and do interesting things. And like I find coaching college kids really interesting because like you're molding and developing people at an age where they're able to be molded and developed. So it's not so much about the college side isn't so much about like, hey, I want you to run fast enough to win a conference championship or make nationals. It's more about like I get to help develop people. And then you look at like the professional side and it's more of like, all right, these people are really good. Yes, they know who they are. Like they're choosing to do this and they want to explore and see how good they can be. So it's more of like, I get to be on this partner on a journey of seeing someone super talented and super motivated and see if we can take them to a place that maybe they didn't even think was possible. So they're like satisfying different needs. And it's the same with like writing, author, whatever you want to call it, it's satisfying a different curiosity, allowing me to explore different things and then like sharing and learning and all that good stuff.
That is so cool to hear you say that because so many people don't figure that out until very late in life where they kind of get stuck in a job and they don't enjoy it or they kind of feel like once they're in a job, they're in it for life. But I love that you have kind of followed your passions and, you have different areas. So do you have any advice before we move on more to running stuff, just in general, the fact that you've been able to do that for people who maybe have a part of their life they enjoy, but they have other interests, they just haven't had the courage to kind of pursue them yet?
That's a good question. And it's actually, I don't know if I'm supposed to talk about this, but it's the subject of my next book called The Passion Paradox, which will be out sometime in 2019. So go read that. But a preview of that is I think like the number one thing is you almost have to be like a dabbler in your interests, right? I think too many people think like, oh, I've got to find my life calling and this is going to be it. And that's not reality. So I think it's like dabble around, find things that are interest to you. And like if it doesn't after a while, just move on to something else. But like, don't get locked into something and then 5 years down the line be like, you know what, I really don't enjoy this, but like this is the only thing I know to do, so I'm going to keep doing that. That's where I think we shoot ourselves in the foot.
I absolutely agree. And my listeners know this about me, but you probably don't. I actually took, when I was an elite, I took 3 months totally off running because my passion, anything had gone other than reaching the finish line. That was pretty much all my running life was about. And, it wasn't even necessarily being away from it for life. I'm now back running, but sometimes it's even just taking a long break, which we're going to talk about in a different area later in this interview. But going back to kind of your two situations of coaching there, I love what you said about molding people into, being good people, which is another thing, I mentioned to you before we started recording, my husband, Steve, is very similar, and that's exactly why he loves coaching collegiate athletes as well. But with thinking, forward into the future, you're now this very in-demand elite level coach. I know that there are plenty of people out there who would love to be coached by you, and you do have a big group right now. Would you ever see yourself kind of setting up a training group? I'm sure you've been asked this a lot. You're smiling, so probably yes. Would you see yourself doing that, or do you feel like that's kind of what we were talking about with the passions, that's too much of one thing?
Yeah, I mean, I would be lying if I didn't say that, like, yeah, like having a big elite group isn't something that interests me. It absolutely does. Can I see myself at some point? 100%. But I think there it's like balancing that out with other things. Like maybe there it's not that I coach collegiate kids, but maybe there like writing, author, speaking, consulting, whatever takes a bigger part in my life because I'm not the type of person who's going to be satisfied or whatever you want to call it, doing one thing. So that's how I would answer that question. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I hear you very loud and clear. I'm exactly the same way. I cannot just do one thing at the same time. Okay, so let's talk about coaching these athletes, elites specifically at the top level, going for world teams, going for the Olympics. Do you see a lot of similarities between them, or does each person need kind of a slightly tailored approach, working on their strengths or working on their weaknesses? How do you kind of approach these different elite runners?
Yeah, so I'm big on individualization. I'm big on the fact that, yeah, we're all people. Like we're all very similar in a lot of ways, but there's slight differences maybe based on like upbringing, culture, genetics, whatever you want to call it that matter. Especially when you're looking at what motivates people and like why they're doing that, which I think is really important at the elite level for our sport, because let's be honest, very few are going to make it like big financially and be financially stable from running at an elite level. So we have to I have to do a good job of diving deep and saying like, what are you trying to get out of this? Like, what's your purpose in doing that? And that's number one before we even get to the like individualization of the training stuff.
So do you do some kind of research essentially before you even take on an athlete to kind of see what what their upbringing is like and what their kind of situation is, or is this more once you've committed to them?
Yeah, so whenever someone reaches out, I do my Google internet stalking of them to kind of get an idea. And it's funny, it's like, even if you look at social media now, like I don't really care what people post, but what I think is really interesting is people tend to post on social media things that interest them and are of value to them. So like right there, I'm getting like a little bit of a glimpse of like who this person like wants to project that they are, which is, I think it's important. So I do that due diligence on that. And then, having done this a while, the biggest thing is like I ask people that I trust. And a lot of times that's people I coach. Sarah Crouch has come to me on a couple times and been like, Steve, this person is going to ask you and you need to say yes. Like they are good. And like they're going to be a good fit for you and you're going to love working with them and et cetera. And I've known Sarah for so long. I'm like, that's good enough for me because like I trust her judgment and all that stuff. So it's like the peer-to-peer is incredibly important here.
And that's so good to hear because I think that's one of the, key traits for a good coach is kind of making sure that you're going to be a good fit, not just saying yes for the sake of saying yes. So I think that is something that is good about you. And, at this point, you can afford to be selective. Now, you've seen, many of the best in the world throughout, previous roles that you've had throughout the running world, and then now working with a lot of them. Are there any traits or things that you see in a lot of the athletes that have reached the very top level that are very common? And maybe not very common, but are common among these athletes that you see and you think that's kind of not the secret, but they've got it?
Oh, that's a good question. I think everybody can get there in slightly different ways, but I think what everyone tends to have who let's say maximizes their potential at that level or gets close enough to is they're bought in. They believe in like what I'm saying, right? They believe that like the training is going to work, that we're going to get there. They believe in themselves that like, hey, we're going to do something that maybe no one else in the world believes, but us two or us, whoever their support group is. And they have that almost irrational belief that they're going to get it done. And it's not founded in fake confidence, right? Use another example, like Sarah Crouch, like, there's been marathons where she's like, I am ready to run this, or I am ready to run this. And sometimes she does and sometimes she doesn't, but she absolutely believes it. It is not her like faking her way through, not her like saying like, oh, if I just, give myself some confidence, I'll get it done. she believes it. It's founded on the training and what she's done and all that stuff. And I think that's what you see with really good athletes is they figure out some way to have that buy-in and that belief that, like, I can do this and this is going to work.
And I think Sarah is a good example of that. And I know, the listeners absolutely love Sarah. I know that. And, her trying to break 2:30 is the perfect example because, I honestly don't think I could have kept going the way Sarah has, just kind of trying again and again and again. And I've told her that many times. But she's a good example of, like you said, she believes she's going to do it. She knows she's going to do it. It's just a case of when, and she doesn't give up. She calls herself brave little idiot and is just going to keep going for it. So, that's a great thing. But do you see that do you get a feeling for that even when you're looking on like social media, like you said, or maybe you have like a call with the person and you're considering them? Do you kind of get a feel for that before you even have this conversation? Yeah,
I do. I think it comes down to like reading people's like motivations for doing it, right? So you can really tell when you talk to someone and you start digging on this stuff, if they're like motivated from extrinsic stuff or intrinsic stuff. Are they motivated because they want to call themselves a professional runner and they want the status and the appearance? Or is it because like they really, really, truly want to see like, am I good enough? Can I do this? I enjoy this. Like I enjoy the pounding and the training and all that stuff. And like, that's the difference you're looking for.
That's cool. And it's clearly working because the athletes that you have got, you can kind of see they've been successful, but they also have exactly what you're talking about. I can see that within each of them. Now, just briefly talking about collegiate running, you mentioned about molding people into kind of who they are. Do you get a kind of sense for athletes in college and what they're going to do for the future? Like you kind of get a feeling like they're going to go far, or this athlete might just kind of make it through college and then step away. Like, do you sense that within them as well?
Yeah, I think you sense that in like almost anything they do, right? It's not just running. Like I can sit there and be like, oh, this person probably going to run professionally. I've had one individual who was like, yeah, I've known for years that this kid's going to keep going, right? But it's really in whatever they pursue. We're lucky on the college scene because like we get to see these kids hours every day for 6 days a week or whatever have you on months on end. We get to see people out there under high levels of stress, at their highest moments, at their lowest moments, when they're broken down, when they're crying, all that stuff. And like how you handle all that and the adversity shows like to me what you're going to do in life. Like there's been so many conversations I've had with like my assistant coaches and stuff where we sat there and been like, look, I don't know if this kid's going to like make it in running all the way, but like he or she is going to do something in life that is awesome. And like having been in the college scene for, 5-6 years now, like you see that. You see the people, it's like, oh, no wonder like they're on to grad school and doing this, or they're doing some entrepreneurship thing here, or he or she is like made his way into like this major company. Like it's the people who have like found that drive and all that stuff on the track. One of my good friends from college was an investment banker. Always like to tell me is like, the reason I was able to like get this far has been really successful is the same reason I was able to run 110-mile weeks in Houston, Texas, and make nationals and cross. It's the same thing. We're just applying it to different things. So I think on the college level, like you're looking not only on the like running side, but like, am I teaching this person like the skill set to translate this over to what they do in the real world?
And is that something you think you can teach or can learn over time? Or is this something that's kind of for someone listening who's thinking, well, I haven't ever been that person, but I want to be that person?
Yeah, I think it's like we're not stuck, right? I think we have this false reality where we think that like, oh, I am who I am. No, if you step back and you think and you look, hey, 10 years ago, who was I? What was I doing? What was I motivated for? It's different from now. We change, and like how that direction of change is up to us. So as a college coach, like my job, I think, is like trying to get people and mold people to find things that like gives them opportunity to like be that type of person where they're driven to, succeed at whatever they're trying to do.
And that's great. And that's exactly what is kind of wanted in a collegiate coach, because I know having been a coach myself for a few years and seeing it through my husband, one of the worst things is seeing someone who's just running either for the money or for just the kind of going through the motions, because that just is... It's miserable for both parties. It's miserable for you as the coach, having to try and motivate them when you know that they don't want to be motivated. And for them, they're not enjoying it. So what's the point in doing it? So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Right, let's talk about your most recent book, Peak Performance. And Science of Running is your previous book, which was, for what I read, an Amazon top 100 bestseller, which is very impressive. Now, I have to admit, Steve, I have not read the book, as I did not expect to see you here or grab you. So I haven't read it. So for those, I might ask questions in here that either come from the book or you talk about in the book. But for those who have not read it, I know a lot of my listeners have and they loved it. What would you say is a synopsis about what the book is about?
That's a good question. So I would say how to sum up 250 pages. So I would say it's about the lessons that we can learn about performance looking across domains. So we kind of came at it as like, hey, performance is performance. It doesn't really matter if it's in running, singing, writing, like being a scientist, teacher, whatever it is, like performance is performance. Let's look at the similarities across these things and see what everyone who's pretty good at what they do is doing. So that's what we try to do.
And I love that in one of the articles about the book that I was reading, it said about the principle of rest, which we will talk about in a minute. But you said in there that you and Brad made sure you had one total rest day per week. And rest day wasn't necessarily a running rest day, although maybe you did coincide it with that. But more, you weren't allowed to research, you weren't allowed to write a complete rest day. So did you find kind of across the board there was a lot of, regardless of what you did, there was a lot of things that were the same within every direction.
Yeah, I mean that was a great example and something that really hit home. Because what you found was that the best performers are really driven. Like that's not a secret. Like they're pushers. But the ones who were able to reach the top and then sustain it were pushers who had the courage and self-awareness to step back and rest, because the reality is whether it's physical or cognitive or emotional, we need to come down from just being go 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 go, and especially in today's world where we're hyper aware and hyper on, being able to step back is a huge thing. So there were a bunch of things like that where it's rest was a commonality. Another one of my favorites that we talked about and learned about is people set themselves up to perform. So whether it's you or I dialing in a warm-up routine or pre-race routine to get ready, the same thing applies to, for instance, Matt Billingsley, who was a drummer for Taylor Swift and some others. So really great performers, and he walked us through his warm-up routine, and I'm he didn't drum at all during the whole thing. He was no, I know how to drum. I'm just trying to get my mind in the right space where I can go out there and perform the thing that I know what to do, but in front of, 50,000 screaming fans. So it's being intentional about setting yourself up to do what you do.
That's so cool. And I think that's such a good example as well, because you can show it in a non-running form, but then to non-runners, us doing a warm-up for a run, they're what? Why would you bother? What is the point?
Right. I mean, that's the thing. It's sometimes you got to step back out of your thing. It's how many people, if you're just going for you're a weekend warrior or going for a jog, you're not going to warm up. You're going to just go straight into your thing, get your thing done. So I think that's where it's really valuable, and what we tried to bring to the table is let's take ourselves out of this niche running world and explore other areas, and maybe you'll find something that you can pull back to our world.
Okay, cool. Thank you for sharing that. And I definitely encourage people to get it. I have links in the show notes so you can go get yourself a copy. And as you heard, Steve has another one coming out next year, so we'll pay attention for that one. All right, so you are kind of known as the science guy. And my husband has told me a few times that you have stood up, within various meetings at this convention we're at. Even though you're into kind of the numbers, the stats, kind of the science behind things, you also are very into talking about running by feel. I've seen many of your athletes kind of discuss how important this is. So how do you find the balance? Because surely the numbers are always like rattling around in your mind, even if you are trying to run by feel.
Yeah, I think that's just like the evolution of a coach. Like when I was young, like I was like heavy into the science, learned it all, which I think is great. Like do it, all that stuff. But like as you deal with people, you realize that they are people. Like we're not coaching robots. Like we're all human beings with, emotions, feelings, all that different stuff and different psychological barriers and blocks. So it's incredibly important to like remember the human component of it. So, for instance, running by feel, like that takes you to that requires a different skill set than just saying, hey, take your Garmin and go run 5-minute pace or whatever have you. But I think it's an incredibly important skill set to develop. So we need to. So I think although I'm known as a science guy and I, as your husband mentioned, sometimes play off that and like meetings and stuff, like I almost see it as like this battle in my head of like, science on the left side and like artist on the right and being like, no, don't go too far in this direction. Like pull back and make sure that like you can relate this stuff and deal with people because we're people.
That's so good to hear. And for someone listening who has found themselves kind of struggling with that, like they have become addicted to using their watch or looking at their pace. Again, bringing Sarah up, she's a good example of someone who, I've done workouts with Sarah and she would look at her watch again and again and again, but she's talked multiple times about taking her watch off before races. So for someone who hasn't had the courage to step away from it, how can they kind of learn to run by feel?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is small steps. Look, it's not like being like, I'm going to ditch my watch forever type thing. With my college kids, for example, I remember like one rep of one workout is where we started. Be like, we're going to run this mile and I'm going to take your watch away. And one girl on our team like tried to hide her watch, and she did until I look at like 100 meters. I'm like, she's looking at her watch. She hit it. So like ran over there and took it from her. And I get that. Like, I get that completely. But I think it's like giving yourself bite-sized things of like, I'm going to take this away. Even if this means like when I was an athlete, sometimes let's say we're doing a mile repeat, I'd be like, I am not looking at my watch until we get past halfway. Now, it's only 800 meters. But like for me, I remember going past like 200. I'm like, look at my watch. I'm like, nope, can't do it. And like you build it up from there. And the goal is very simple, is that, if you look at the best runners, if you look at the best of anything, like they have a very good reading on their intuitive feel, because sometimes you can't rely on the external stuff. And if you live in Houston, Texas, like, and it's 1 billion degrees out with 100% humidity, I'm not going to run as fast as I think in my head based on when I need to race. So I need to learn how to read my body, understand like, although I might want to be running 6-minute pace, like the temperature, the weather is dictating that this pace right here, which might be 6:20, might be 6:30, might be 6:40, who knows? This is the pace. I need to be able to lock into that and understand that.
So you would do that by feel, like you would kind of say, this feels like 6-minute pace effort, for example? For that?
Right, exactly. I think as a coach or as an athlete, like the best thing that you can do is dial in what like different workouts should feel like, effort based, right? So what should 5 by mile feel like at 10K pace? Like I don't know, but like you have to dial in that. So after a while, it's like you can step back and be like, hey, I want you to feel like this. And whatever system you use, like, doesn't matter. I mean, the famed Hungarian coach of the 1950s, Mihaly Egloy, used to like do everything by effort and no paces, no watches, and he'd just tell it was something like, we have hard, we have easy, we have fast, we have, he had a couple others, we have like short, fast, whatever, and it was just like 5 or 6 words, and his athletes knew exactly what that meant. And I think as a coach, that's what I'm looking for is I need my athletes to know when I say, hey, I want this to be like, I want you to find the edge and like just be on it. What does that mean? They need to understand that, and I need to teach them that.
Absolutely. And I know many of my listeners know, and I mentioned it to you before we started recording, that we, Steve and I, my husband Steve, have come up with an 100% effort-based plan. And in my postpartum return to running, Steve, I have been doing 100% by minutes. I haven't done a single pace, nothing, because it's all by minutes, because I wanted to learn from scratch, starting from the very beginning after I had the baby, learning how to run by feel. And it's been so refreshing to not have to worry about paces. And like you said, it doesn't matter about terrain or weather or anything, because you're just running at a certain effort, what it feels like. So another question, you mentioned about the heat in Houston. Now, Houston is probably not going to be considered ideal conditions for training by many people, but you must have figured out some tactics, some ways to prepare for running in heat, because your team do run well regardless of kind of weather and situation in a lot of races. So tell us, what have you learned living in Houston and being able to train well?
Yeah, it's like anywhere. You adapt to your environment. Someone's at altitude, they got to change things a little bit. If you live in the Northeast and you get hit by a snowstorm, like that changes things a lot. So it's just like learning what it is. And with Houston and the heat and humidity, I mean, that's honestly one of the reasons we switched to effort-based stuff a lot. Is like early on, like paces don't mean anything. So we can't do any of the long tempo runs. We can't do the long threshold runs because your body overheats almost regardless of what pace you're going to. So we need to switch that to effort. And then we have to get the kids to understand hey, I don't want you to go over this line, because if you go over this line and it's, again, hot and humid, you dig yourself in a hole really freaking quickly. So we have to teach that as I understand. You want to go to the well. You want to push hard. You want to get better. But part of getting better is making sure that because of our constraints, we do not dig a hole. So to not dig a hole, you need to learn where that line is of where do we stop. And that I can kind of see sometimes, but a lot of that is on the athlete to understand and to realize that. The other thing is we use it to our advantage, We sit there and we talk about how we're getting tough and all that stuff. But more so, we'll do workouts early in the season, and then the first cool day comes around, and we do a workout, and we bring out the watches and all this. I'm like, look, we ran this. I'll tell them, you ran this 10-mile tempo 5 minutes faster than you did when it was hot and humid. And they're like, oh, we're getting fit. And in my head, I'm like, no, it's just good weather. But, it's got this nice, psychological component to it, too.
And is there anything that you can do, let's say you're coming up to NCAA's cross country and it's going to be really cold? Do you have ways of kind of preparing the athletes for that? Or is that at that point you kind of just rely on the grittiness that they've built?
Yeah, what I like to, I mean, we've done some stuff in the past where you can, but I think what I like to do is tell our athletes that we need to be anti-fragile, not fragile. So that means that whatever conditions we're going to come up against, we need to just be able to take it, and even if we haven't dealt with it, deal with it the best we can. And that's part of training in heat and humidity. Is if it's freezing cold and we're not used to it, we're going to prepare the best we can, but then it's getting on the line and realizing that hey, this is going to feel a little bit different. It might not feel as easy, but I know how to get the best effort out of myself regardless of the conditions, regardless of what I'm doing. And that's my goal in these conditions that I'm going to face.
That's great. Thank you. And I know that that's something that everyone listening, you can also apply to yourself and your training, because that's something that is applicable to all. Right. One more thing I wanted to talk about before we get into some deeper stuff is I read an article from you about taking an extended break. One thing I found that you said, it was from your book, that said, listeners, you might have to listen to this a few times to make sure it makes sense, because if you're running, it's going to take you a minute. We've lost the notion of smart work at the expense of hard work, which somehow almost always gets confused with with more work. So what does that mean? Because, when you sit and think about it, that makes sense. But as you mentioned earlier, we've become a go, go, go culture. And within running, it's definitely kind of the notion of the harder I push, the better I'm going to be. So what does that mean when you said that phrase?
I mean, that's exactly what it means. You translated it for me. But I think, so thank you. I think what it means is our culture is one where success in performance has been mistaken for do more work. And that's how we get to it. And that's not reality, right? Performance and success and however we want to measure it isn't dependent on how much work we do. It's how much do we get better at whatever we're trying to perform at. And sometimes that means having the courage to step back and take rest or do less. You know, when I look at the elite level, as I said, I'm very fortunate to work with a lot of elite athletes, and more so I'm fortunate enough to work with them after they've worked with some other coaches and stuff like that. So I get to see what everyone does. And more often than not, like, my job is to say, hey, like, this is some really good stuff right here, but it's probably too much, right? If I can convince you to just take it from 100% pushing to 95%, 94%, whatever it is, just dial it down a little bit. You're going to perform better. And more often than not, like, that's what happens.
And that's one of the, I think, magic keys of where people kind of transition to you and they see that improvement is because they have backed off. And with this, we're both talking about, there's two parts of it. The backing off within your training, kind of like you said, not having to go hard. I remember when I was training in college, I used to think unless I fell to the ground on my knees every workout, I wasn't pushing hard enough. Whereas now I've learned, like, good enough is enough. But then it also comes to an extended break. Now, in this article, it was talking about, taking, I think you were talking about Bernard Lagat taking 5 weeks off, which maybe is a bit extreme for some people. But elites do generally take 5 days to, 3 to 4 weeks off. I know I always used to take 7 to 10 days off. So for someone listening who is thinking, okay, but that's the elite level. I'm a recreational runner. I don't really need to take time off. What would you say to those people?
I would say it benefits you even more so, because, like, you're not just running. You have life, you have work, you have all these other stressors in here. And sometimes running goes from a stress reliever to a stress causer if you're pushing the envelope to try and perform at a race or whatever have you. So I think it's one of those situations where it's not just, people get it wrong. It's not like that you need the physical rest all the time. It's the mental and emotional component of just pushing and pressing and all this stuff. And it's like, even, we're sitting here at this track coaches convention, and it's 4 days of, like, go from morning till night and not a lot of sleep and interacting after this. Like, I'm going to go home this weekend and not do anything, like, mentally demanding, because, like, this is stressful. And that's how the body works. Like, we can't get around it, that, like, you cannot just keep stressing yourself for a long time and hope to, like, adapt and hope to keep going. It's not how it works. So, like, building in that mental and emotional time is incredibly important. And that's what I tell to both my elite and my college side is, like, well, can I do a little bit of running during this? I'm like, that's fine. If you want to go for a 3-mile jog, that's cool. But the biggest thing that I want is I want this to be emotionally just restorative, so that you come back and you've got that, like, oh, I'm itching and ready to go again. Like, I'm excited. I'm not just, like, going through the motions or doing this because it's my routine. Like, I've got that, like, youthful excitement that I had maybe in high school when I knew, like, oh, it's almost cross country season. Like, we're about to get going.
Do you think any part of that is, though, that people might kind of convince themselves that they feel that way? I mean, I remember it specifically in college, but I have come across it in other situations where people say, oh, I'm getting the itch after, 3 days. And they say, oh, I really want to, get going again. But it's either because they had a bad race and they want to kind of get back to proving themselves, or they had a good race and they're now excited to see what they can do. So do you have any, just going further beyond that, any more advice for someone who thinks, yeah, but I am excited to get going. I do feel that hunger, but maybe it's kind of a false one. Like maybe they think they've got it back, but then they're, a month back into training and they're like, oh, I'm burned out.
So what I do to prevent that, and I do this with my college team especially, but also post-collegiate runners, is I say 1 week off completely. Okay. 1 week before you even think about it. I don't care if you get the itch at 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, 1 week off. The next week, you can do whatever it is you want, okay? But but it still has to be emotionally where you're relaxed and all that stuff. If you get the itch and you start running more, that's fine as long as like that is at a point. Then after that, then we can consider like building up. And I think for people who are used to pushing, like building in like this almost staircase step back into it, and also a requirement at the very beginning to like, hey, this is it. Like, I don't care if you have the itch, like you got to chill and don't even think about it. Nothing's happening till we get through this. I think that like helps at least alleviate and take care of that like false idea of like, oh, I just had a really bad race, and after 3 days, like I want to get back at it because I want to prove myself and get better. And then a month down the line, you're just like, oh, I really wish I had that time off. So it's like building in safety steps to prevent that.
I think that's really good. And would you say 7 days is kind of a good time for people listening to take as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some, could be 7, could be 8, whatever it is, but there's something nice about having a week where it's just like, this week, nothing.
Absolutely. Okay, great. Thank you for clearing that up. All right, so let's kind of talk about something which I know many of my listeners are going to want to know about. We're going to tread carefully here because there is an ongoing investigation, and we obviously, there's certain things that can and can't be talked about. But going back to your time as a runner yourself, maybe you could give the listeners just a little bit of insight into, what your favorite events were, what your kind of proudest moments were, just to kind of give them a bit of a background on you.
Oh, man. So I mostly ran the mile. I ran everything from 800 to 10K in cross country. Ran 401 for the mile in high school. That's probably in my running career what I was known for the most. But like my proudest moment was probably my sophomore year in NCAA cross country. We won conference as a team at Rice, and then we sent 3 individuals, I was one of them, to the national meet in cross country. And we just missed it as a team. But, like, there's something about, like, getting together with a bunch of guys who are underdogs. We're not, like, in our region. We weren't Arkansas. We weren't Texas. We were just some dudes who were trying to run fast. And, like, we almost pulled it off, and we sent 3 guys to nationals. And then that team component, that team bond, like, is something that you can't create in other ways. So that's one memory where it like sticks out, even more so, even though my teammate Marcel beat me by 2 seconds in that race to qualify. Still a little bitter about that, but no, but it's awesome. So like that team bond is amazing.
Absolutely. I think having 3 of you, that would have been such a cool situation because you know this, I know this, probably not many of the listeners, unless they are involved in college world of coaching. It's very much a kind of a big David and Goliath situation. So for you guys as the Goliaths, the Davids, having 3 of you going would have been just such a cool situation. So I can imagine that being special. So after college, you continued running at a pretty high level, ended up at the Nike Oregon project. And, we can't get into too many specifics of what happened there, but, some things kind of developed and there's an ongoing investigation now, but there's a lot of conversation now about kind of finding a line of what is right and what is wrong. And, from what I've seen of you, from what I know of you, you're very much this is right, this is wrong, a very morally correct, morally straight person. And, you saw some things that kind of were in that gray area, not technically illegal, but not technically, the right thing to do. So maybe you could tell us a bit about, what you are able to say with regards to, some things you saw and how they kind of affected you as an athlete.
Yeah, so that's a tricky subject. But I guess the biggest thing that I'd say is that we're all people, right? I blew the whistle on something, but like I have my morality and, I try and do the right things, but like we're all flawed people. Like I'm not perfect on any of this stuff either. And I think that's important to like set the stage of like, I'm not some moral crusader on this stuff. Like I'm trying to figure out this crazy world the best I can, just like someone else. And I'm going to screw up and make mistakes as well. But I think there it's like, there's just this base knowledge of like what is sport about? And I think that's what it comes down to is like, what is sport about and what are we trying to do? And it comes back to my time there is like, looking at what I'm doing and why I coach college kids now is like, what lessons are you trying to teach? Like, what are you trying to get out of this? Can you step back and whatever you're doing with your elites, can you tell, that parent of, some 18-year-old kid who's about to entrust you, can you tell them that like, hey, don't worry, we're going to develop your kid, or, hey, we're going to experiment and try and do this, this, and this, and this. And we don't really know the repercussions of it. And it's not illegal, but it's not, it might be crossing some boundaries on stuff. And it's kind of sketchy. And, as I look back, like, I think that's like my judgment on that stuff. Is there stuff that, I wouldn't want anybody have done to me as 18, 19, 20, whatever year old. And it's something that I wouldn't want, my parents to have to deal with, like, oh, well, my kid just had this done because like some coach had them do this. And I think those are the things that, or those are the lessons and things that I looked back on at that point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that'd be the case, and probably makes you even more stubbornly want to stick to what you're doing now, and how, like you said, you want to help be a good person and grow these people you see coming into good people, because you learned from your time there what you essentially didn't want to do with regards to kind of, like you said, parents trusting in you, and you kind of yourself were used essentially as a guinea pig in some way. I don't know how much you can tell us about that, but you mentioned that you were a whistleblower in amongst a few other people who also said about what kind of happened. But looking back, does any part of you kind of feel like, I don't want to say like abused or exposed or anything like that, but does any part of you kind of feel hurt that kind of was what you became?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll put it like this. I don't remember how old I was, but I was right out of grad school. I was 24, 25, right out of grad school as my first coaching job, like besides like helping out high school kids, right, on the side. So it was my first coaching job, and you're working with like the highest level and legends and stuff like that. And then I'd say like it's easy to like put the blinders on and be naive and just like, well, this is kind of, I got this feeling in the back of my neck where this is kind of weird, but like, people say it's all right, and they're saying it's all right, and I'm going to, like, they've done some stuff in the sport, so I'm going to trust in that stuff. And, honestly, if I wish anything, I wish I was more, I had the skill set to be more aware at that time, and the skill set to be able to step back and like see things from a bigger picture, which I didn't at that time. Is that like abuse, or is that stuff? No, I don't know. But I think like there's a response. What it sent in my head is that like the older we are, the longer we're in this sport, like the more we have responsibilities as adults to like understand, set the stage, and like create this like clear-cut definition on things, or this clear-cut moral boundary on stuff, so that people don't have to make those decisions. And honestly, one of the big things and one of the big reasons why I came forward is pretty simple. Is again, it's my first job out of grad school, and I didn't want anybody to have to go through that. I didn't want anybody to, while they're trying to figure out what they're trying to do in their career, and it's just starting, and who they are, and all that stuff. I didn't want them to have to figure that. I didn't want 18-year-old kids who might be put in the same, training environment to have to be put through something like that and not know morally where to go, or not have the skill set yet to be able to like speak up or do anything like that. So I think, that was probably a large reason why I came forward on this stuff. And
I can imagine that, a lot of it is, we don't know, you don't know the kind of side effects of how that could affect someone, down the road. So these are things that you would want to prevent. There's plenty of things we hear about medically now that kind of come out, and it's like, why did we ever do this? But this is a good example of something that could seriously damage someone down the road, because you're messing with the kind of genetics and, the overall health. So I'm glad that you are able to kind of share some things with us. I will tell the listeners to, go research if you want to learn some more. But just to kind of wrap up with this part of the interview, do you the fact that this investigation has been going on for what, 2, 3, 4 years?
Something really long.
Do you see an endpoint? Do you think this is ever going to get resolved the way it should, or does in your heart do you kind of feel like, oh, this is kind of, I'm never going to be happy with kind of what comes out of this?
It's funny. It also points to, again, my naivete on this stuff too. It's like coming out of Oregon Project and then going into this stuff, it's like you have an idea of how anti-doping works and you think, oh, this is how it works. And then you get in it and it's like, whoa, this isn't how it works. Like, this has a lot of complex balls in there that people are juggling and doing all this stuff. And I think I've learned more about the both the benefits and the flaws in the current system. So, at different points in this whole multiple year process, I mean, there's been points where I've been frustrated and been like, oh, why won't something occur? Why won't this? But there's also points where it's like, that's out of my control. Like, I said what I knew. Like, I put myself in what I experienced out there, and like that, yeah. And that's the only thing I can do. And it kind of sucks because, like, honestly, you feel like your life is on hold a little bit because, like, you want to wait to see what's the outcome is and what's going to happen.
Well, and things like this, you have to, be very careful with what you say.
Right, exactly. So it kind of sucks where part of your life is like, well, I can't really talk about any of that stuff. So we'll just like erase these couple memories for a while, which is kind of crazy. But like, it's you just got to come to terms with it and like accept it and be okay with the fact that like, hey, like I did what I could, and was it perfect? No, but like, this is what it is, and like I got to be all right with that.
Yeah, and it seems very much like you have kind of come to be at peace with it. I'm sure it does bother you at random times, but for the most part, you seem like you've kind of learned to live with it for now, and to kind of wrap up here with a more positive ending or something that I would love to learn from you. Actually, my husband Steve came up with this. Are there some essential training principles that you believe in just for any athlete who wants to train for a race, or any runner wants to train, some things that they must include within a training segment? And we can talk about if you'd rather break it down, like, does this change for distance, or like, is it?
That's a good question. So, I'm a big believer in we have all these tools in the toolbox to do all these different things. And like, I don't think necessarily that any are better than others, but what I would say is that whatever you're training with, like, it can't be like this one particular workout, this one particular speed, this one particular thing is the key to it. You need to like touch the rainbow of paces that we need to, and how often you do and what you emphasize. Well, that depends on the race and depends on, the individual. But like, I think it's really important to create that like all around development where it's like, even if I'm training for the marathon, like I got to do some like 100-meter fast strides or something to just like keep that speed there. And the opposite applies if you're training for a middle distance thing. Like I got to have something long in there. And I think we make mistakes when we get like too dogmatic on like this right here is the secret. There are no secrets.
Okay, great. Thank you for explaining that. All right. I'm just going to take a moment to thank our sponsors, and we'll be back with the Running for Real 4. Friends, my book comes out in just over a week. How is that even possible? Even more crazy, my goal race, the Walt Disney World Half Marathon, is tomorrow. Can you believe it? I can't. That also means Bailey is just a few days from turning one whole year old. Now you know I shared my story as I was going through it, and my decision to stop running to get my period back, you also know about by now. I kind of became the face of amenorrhea. Yeah, I had it for 9 years, and I kind of deserve that title. But I worked really hard to bring awareness to it so people like me, and maybe like you, didn't have to feel like something was wrong with them. Maybe it's not you, but maybe it's a friend, a daughter, a sister who's going through this, secretly feeling like they're broken. I hope you will support me by purchasing a copy either now through pre-order or when it comes out on January 21st. And I know with the million things you may have going on right now, it might not be easy to remember that. So I can remind you, if you want to sign up for my email newsletter at tinamuir.com/subscriber. But before you switch off, let me first say my email newsletter, I know that phrase kind of brings about a sense of creepy, like leave me alone, stop bombarding me every day or multiple times a day. I know I don't need to let you know every time one tiny little thing changes. Hello, Express. Does anyone else sign up for Express emails? They drive me crazy. I am telling you, though, my email newsletter is once a week. That's all, although there may be just a few extra around the book release. It's just me sharing something to get you thinking, a challenge, and of course some updates, which is where I will remind you that the book comes out. You can sign up at tinamuir.com/subscriber, or you can pre-order by going to tinamuir.com/pre-order, and that will take you to the Amazon site where you can pre-order. Thank you so much in advance. Your support means the world. All right, Steve, 4 more questions for you, starting with one piece of advice for life.
One piece of advice for life. Oh, man. I've talked a lot about like finding your interests on so far. And I think if I take that to the other level is something that I wish I would have known earlier is like explore far and wide, like be curious, find how to be curious. I don't care whatever it is. Find what interests you and then like do deep dives on that. Another half of that is like have the courage to like step away from things. Like don't be stuck if you're sitting there at your like 9-to-5 job and you're like, this makes me miserable, but this is the only thing I know how to do. Go learn how to do something else. And it doesn't mean a degree, right? I mean, I have very little background on writing, but like I did enough to where it's like, all right, I'm getting okay where I can do this okay enough. And that's the stuff that I would pass along to other people.
I think that's great. And just to clarify, Steve isn't saying quit your 9-to-5 job and just go, I'm going to, be a marine biologist. But he's saying, you can pursue it on the side. You can kind of learn about it in your free time, things like that as a start, and then kind of make it a side business and then kind of go for it eventually.
Exactly.
All right. One person to follow on social media and why?
Oh, man. One person to follow on social media. I love following Adam Grant, who is some sort of psychologist who works in business, but gosh, he posts like maybe one thing a day, but it is like spot on.
And that's on Twitter, I take it? Okay. All right. Yeah, I know you're more of a Twitter guy. And how would you like to be remembered? Not that you're going anywhere anytime soon, but what do you want us to remember you for?
Oh, gosh.
Remember this interview if you'd rather do that. I feel like when I ask this question, I'm making people feel like they're not going to be around much longer.
I know. It's the end. I'm in my mid-30s. It's going downhill quickly. I think if I look at what I want to be remembered by, it's like I want to be remembered as like someone who's just like anybody else in the sense that they're flawed, but they tried to figure out how to do things better and tried to like continually grow as both a coach, athlete, person, whatever have you. And if I do that, then I'm in a good spot.
I hope you've read the book by Carol Dweck,
Yes.
Mindset.
Yeah.
I was going to say, because a lot of this that you've mentioned is very much in that wheelhouse. All right. And finally, what do you tell yourself, or what did you tell yourself? I'm not sure how much you race nowadays, on the start line of a race.
Oh, gosh. So I tend to have, my inner dialogue was like this, is I was the type of person who needed to downplay what I was about to do. Okay. So I would sit there and tell myself, all right, I'm about to line up for this race, but let's look at it. I care about how I do. Maybe my parents do, or maybe my like teammates or coach or whoever it is. But like, even if I suck and I fall apart and do horrible, like they're not going to hate me. They're going to support me. like, it's not the end of the world if I fail. So I was like, my rationale was like, I'm always trying to eliminate this fear of failure to give me the opportunity to take risks, right? Because if I'm afraid, then I'm not going to take risks. But if I free myself up from that, then I'm going to take risks. And sometime it might pay off, sometime it might backfire, but like, it's way more enjoyable that way.
I love that, and that's absolutely how I feel. So, but what would be the last thing you would say? So would it be enjoy it, or like go for it, or do you have any specific word that you would say just to push you?
It was probably some combination of cuss words in my head to get me fired up when I was 18 years old. But yeah, in my college career, like, well, I'll give you an example. When I was running in college, like, one year we got these stupid, ridiculous, like, sweat wristbands. And before every race, like, I'd line up, you'd get on the starting line, you'd put your hand down, and I'd look down at that stupid thing. And it would just remind me, it's like, all right, we got 7 other people doing this, or like 6 other people doing this. And it's like, it's not just me, like, we're all out here. And like, just having that reminder in my head was incredibly important.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right, Steve, we've mentioned your books, Science of Running, Peak Performance, and there will be another one next year. What did you say it was?
The Passion Paradox?
Passion Paradox. So I will put links in the show notes. Is the Passion Paradox available for pre-order yet or not?
Yes, on Amazon.
All right. So I'll put links to all of those in the show notes for you to go get. Steve, where can people find out more about you if they want to follow you?
So my website, scienceofrunning.com, or just follow me on Twitter mostly, at Steve Magness.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for giving me this time today. I really appreciate it, and I know my listeners would have loved learning from you.
Well, thanks a lot for having me.
My friends, if you have a minute and you could leave a review on your favorite podcast player, Apple Podcasts, aka iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Spotify, or whatever else podcast player you use to listen to this podcast, or if you would subscribe to this podcast, you will help me get out in front of new runners to make our tribe even bigger and even better. It might not seem like you as one person can make a difference, but really it helps a lot. And it shows me you appreciate the hard work I put in for those. Thank you so much. So much good in that episode, and I hope you take his advice and think hard about it. Steve really is one of the best coaches out there right now. So to access his mind like that, we are really very lucky. Again, I apologize that we couldn't really say too much too specific about the ongoing investigation, but I recommend you do go look up on what is going on. You can find links to everything we talked about today in the show notes, in addition to Steve's books, at tinamuir.com/episode 98. If you are a first-time listener, I hope you really enjoyed this episode. I hope you will go subscribe to this podcast and get it every Friday and some bonus Mondays. And if you are a loyal, regular listener, thank you so much for being here. You are the best. Now remember, please go get yourself a copy of my Overcoming Amenorrhea book, which is now available for pre-order on Amazon and comes out in just 3 days if you are listening to this on the day it comes out. Monday, January 21st, 2019. If you appreciate me and what I do with these interviews, that's one way you can show me a big thank you. It may not seem like one purchase can make a difference, but it really does. If you buy this book, it can help me to get to a bestseller status. I really want to make it so that I am the number one. I get to a bestseller rank within the running and jogging category. That would be huge for me and would set me up for a long time when it comes to an author status, and just get me some other kind of attention that I'm trying to kind of build my brand here. So thank you so much to everyone who has already pre-ordered. Again, if you wait till the 21st, you can get yourself a paperback copy. So it could be a nice print version in your hands. I'm so proud of it, and just seeing it when it arrived with the cover and just seeing that this was my book that I'd written, I felt so much pride and just a wonderful feeling. So thank you to everyone who has continued to support me. It means the world. Remember, an ocean is made up of single droplets. So even though you think your one purchase might not make a difference, it really does. Thanks for your help in helping me to be a bestseller. I hope we can get there together. Have a wonderful week, my friends, and I will see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.